The Old Testament scriptures taken from 2 Kings 6, verses 8 through 23. Once, when the king of Aram was at war with Israel, he took counsel with his officers. He said, "At such and such a place shall be my camp." But the man of God sent word to the king of Israel, "Take care not to pass this place, for the Armenians are going down there." The king of Israel sent word to the place of which the man of God spoke. More than once or twice, he warned a place so that it was on the alert. The mind of the king of Aram was greatly perturbed because of this. He called his officers and said to them, "Now tell me, who among us is betraying us to the king of Israel?" Then one of his officers said, "No one, my lord king. It is Elisha, the prophet in Israel, who tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedchamber." He said, "Go and find where he is, and I will send and seize him." He was told he is in Dothan. So he sent horses and chariots there and a great army. They came by night and surrounded the city. When an attendant of the man of God rose early in the morning and went out, an army with horses and chariots was all around the city. His servant said, "Alas, master, what shall we do?" He replied, "Do not be afraid, for there are more with us than there are with them." Then Elisha prayed, "O Lord, please open the eyes that he may see." So the Lord opened the eyes of the servant, and he saw the mountain. The mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire were all around Elisha. When the Armenians came down against him, Elisha prayed to the Lord and said, "Strike this people, please, with blindness." So he struck them with blindness as Elisha had asked. Elisha said to them, "This is not the way, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom you seek." And he led them to Samaria. As soon as they entered Samaria, Elisha said, "O Lord, open the eyes of these men so that they may see." The Lord opened their eyes, and they saw that they were inside Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he said to them, "Father, shall I strike them?" "Shall I strike them?" he answered. "No." "Would you strike those whom you have taken captive with your sword and with your bow?" "Set food and water before them so that they may eat and drink, and let them go to their master." So he prepared for them a great feast. After they ate and drank, he sent them on their way, and they went to their master. And the Armenians no longer came raiding into the land of Israel.
Thanks, Debbie, and good morning to everyone. This is the 10th in a series of our peace series for the summer. 3 more to go after this. So at the end of August, we'll be moving into something new. Last Sunday, Jeanette talked about disrupting violence. And what we're going to look at this morning is ways that we might use goodness to overcome evil. Somebody has said that there's 3 ways of behaving. You can return evil for good. You can return evil for evil, or you can return good for evil. Now, the first of those could be thought of as downright devilish, doing something bad after somebody has done something nice for you is not very nice. The second, you can really think of as kind of a human response. We hear a lot of this. We read and hear a lot about vengeance and revenge, retribution, and It's not uncommon in the world. Some of us probably even recognize it occasionally in ourselves, the desire to return evil for evil. The third, which is what we're focusing on today, is the divine practice of returning good for evil. As I said, it's returning evil for evil is a natural instinct. It's a human response. There's a story of a lady once who went to a doctor. She had been feeling unwell for quite some time. And she went to the doctor, and the doctor examined her very carefully. And the doctor said, lady, I'm sorry to inform you, but you have rabies. And immediately she got out her notepad and started writing furiously. And the doctor said, what are you doing? Are you writing your will? She said, no, I'm making a list of all the people I'm going to bite. So she saw rabies as an opportunity to get revenge. The story of Elisha in the conflict with the people from the nation of Aram is quite an amazing story. You may know about Elisha from the Old Testament. He was known as a successor to Elijah and quite an activist. In fact, he developed a reputation of being something of a miracle worker, a wonder worker. Now, I think it feels a bit strange in a way to turn to the wars of the Old Testament to look for an example of peacemaking, because there's no doubt that when you read the Old Testament, it's filled with dozens of wars. I saw a list of all the wars that are in the Old Testament. It was quite a long list. But whatever you make of those wars and what that all means, there's no doubt that there's elements in the Old Testament that looked ahead to a time of peace, the time that Jesus was going to be bringing. When Jesus was born, of course, the message was peace on earth, goodwill to man. Now, the word Aram, I understand, is Hebrew for the nation of Syria, and it was located to the northeast of Israel. It included the rich area of Mesopotamia, and actually in the same land where the New Testament cities of Damascus, Paul was struck down on the road to Damascus, and the city of Antioch, which became an early city of Christians. And Abraham, sometime before the story of Elisha, had sent a servant to the nation of Aram to find a wife for Isaac, found Rebecca. So Aram figures in the New Testament in a number of ways. So this amazing story involves Elisha, who somehow kept tipping off the king of Israel to these ambushes that the king of Aram was trying to set up. And every time they'd set up an ambush to try to ambush the children of Israel, somehow Elisha found out. And the king of Aram got so furious, he was convinced there was some kind of spy. And the king's servant says, no, I think it was actually Elisha that's tipping off the king. So the king of Aram says, go find that prophet. We've got to do something about him. So they found him in the town of Dothan, and the king of Aram sent an army with horses and chariots and surrounded that town. Now, when Elisha's servant saw this, he was petrified, and Elisha prayed that God would open his eyes. And the way the story goes is that when that happened, the servant actually saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire, some amazing symbol of the power of God that was going to be present um, with Elisha. And then as the enemy approached, Elisha prayed, strike this army with blindness. And so suddenly all of these soldiers, according to the story, are blind, and Elisha goes out and says, actually, you're on the wrong road. Just follow me and I'll take you where you want to go. A bit of a trickster there, I'd say. And he takes them right to the king of Israel in Samaria. So the king of Israel is sitting there and has these soldiers in front of him. And the king says, shall I kill them? And Elisha's response is, do not kill them. Would you kill those you have captured with your own sword or bow? Set food and water before them so they may eat and drink and then go back to their master. So he prepared a feast, a great feast for them. And after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away and they returned to their master. And the account ends by saying, so the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. It seemed that returning good for evil stopped a series of raids and wars. In the 5th chapter of Matthew, it says, do not resist one who is evil. I remember as I was growing up, my dad, who was quite active in various Mennonite activities, had a lot of books on his shelf about the doctrine of non-resistance. And in that period of Mennonite history, the term non-resistance really stood out as the way a lot of Mennonites tended to look at what peacemaking was all about. I think it was kind of understandable because I was born just 3-4 years after the end of World War II. So my parents and their parents would have just come through 2 world wars. And there was a lot of emphasis on not taking up arms, not going to war, and really thinking about this idea of not resisting evil. So it focused on what you would not do. Do not go to war. Don't lodge lawsuits against people. I think it was really good in that aspect. What it tended to do was not focus as much, I think, on what the Bible says about what you should do. And really, the New Testament's pretty clear about that. Romans 12, Paul actually is quoting from the Jewish scriptures. And the quote is, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. And the place that Paul actually got that from was the book of Proverbs. You can see it there side by side. If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink, for you will heap burning coals on his head. and the Lord will reward you. So I thought of that this week when I read the story of Marjorie Perkins, an 87-year-old school teacher in Brunswick, Maine, who fed a burglar. Did anybody else see that story? So the story is that, and this happened just the last week, that she was awakened at 2 a.m. and saw this young fellow standing over her bed saying, "I'm going to cut you," threatening her. Well, this spry, spunky old lady jumped out of bed, apparently grabbed a chair and started swinging at him. Not exactly non-resistant at that point, but he walked away then and into the kitchen, and she went to try to make sure that he left. Well, he was standing in the kitchen, and according to the article, this is what it says. He said he was awfully hungry and hadn't had anything to eat for quite a while. And I said, "Well, here's a box of peanut butter and honey crackers. You can have that whole box." I gave him 2 containers of Ensure, and I gave him 2 tangerines. So the article says that while this intruder snacked in her kitchen, Perkins apparently slipped around the corner and on her rotary phone dialed 911 as fast as she could. And the teenager actually left before police arrived, but a police dog was able to track him down a few blocks away. And it turns out that this guy was actually somebody that a few years earlier had actually mowed the lawn, had been hired by this elderly woman to mow her lawn, and she actually recognized him. You've heard a lot these days about artificial intelligence, and I want to assure you that I prepared most of this sermon myself, but but I thought it would be interesting to see what artificial intelligence has to say about this topic. So how many of you have tried out the Chat GPT, this sort of AI stuff? The way it works basically is there's a website you can go to, and it's not exactly like Google, because with Google, if you were looking up something about peacekeeping, you might just type the word peacekeeping. But with Chat GPT, you write out a detailed instruction of what you want Chat GPT to do for you. So I wrote this: write a brief talk where we describe how the Bible teaches us to feed our enemies and overcome evil with good. Include a few examples from the Bible and from history where people did this and brought about a good result. So for no more than 5 seconds later, it spat out a whole page or more of text, and this is how it started. Today, we gather to explore the profound wisdom that the Bible imparts on how to respond to our enemies and overcome evil with goodness. The Bible offers invaluable teachings on compassion, forgiveness, and love, even in the face of adversity. One powerful lesson it imparts is to feed our enemies, not with physical food alone, but with the sustenance of kindness and understanding. Isn't that a wonderful phrase? The sustenance of kindness and understanding. Now, I didn't edit any of that. That was word for word the way AI spat it out. So how does AI do this? Well, I don't know all the details, but in brief, it basically digests millions of documents, articles, web pages, and somehow extracts that knowledge and creates new text that integrates it all. What what this tells me, and of course it's AI relying on the accumulated knowledge of mankind that's represented by what it extracts. So what this tells me is that mankind, as summarized here by artificial intelligence, that mankind knows really what the Bible teaches about returning good for evil. We've heard a narrative that was based on the, accumulated wisdom of that artificial intelligence actually tapped into. And then it went on to cite some examples from the Bible, and it mentioned the role of Mahatma Gandhi in nonviolence and non-resistance, Dr. Martin Luther King, and how he echoed the teachings of Jesus. So this is indeed one of my favorite topics, and probably it is because I grew up with a dad who had really embraced this idea of trying to return good for evil. How many of you have heard the story of when my dad dealt with some gas thieves on our farm? Okay, well, I wasn't sure if I was going to tell it, but I'll tell it briefly. When I was, in fact, I think this happened a year or two before I was born in the late 40s. There was something happening in our neighborhood, a lot of Mennonite farmers, something happening where these farmers would go to their gas tanks, these big tanks that they had on their farms to hold gas, and realize that the gas level was lower than what they had last seen it. And they realized that there were thieves. Of course, I mean, the majority of these farmers didn't lock their tanks. They would, just like we never locked our doors when I was growing up. And so my dad set up kind of a Rube Goldberg type of a device where he strung a string across our driveway, had the string attached to the trigger on a mousetrap, and the flapper part of the mousetrap had another string tied to that that went about 50 or 100 feet up to the second floor bedroom, where he had it tied to an alarm. And sure enough, some days later, the alarm goes off. My dad creeps down and he sees some guys at the gas tank. Well, as he approached, they saw him coming, and car took off, and at least one or two guys that was there at the tank went flying down over the field, presumably to be picked up by the car. But my dad saw who it was, and he recognized these guys because my dad had a potato route in the town of Elizabethtown. And so the next time he was in town, he saw these guys on the square of E-Town. He recognized them as kind of a local gang, some guys that would hang out and not really be up to much good. But he went up to them. He didn't mention anything about the thievery, but he asked them if they would, if they'd be able to come out to our place for ice cream. And lo and behold, they accepted the invitation, and they came out and sat around our big kitchen table there with my mother and my dad. And the story is that the subject of gas and thievery didn't arise at all until the very end when they were about to leave. My dad just said, "Now, if you ever run low in gas and you are thinking about, stealing some, just you can come out and just ask me, and I'll give you some gas. And so these guys left, and when they left, under the plate, under one of the plates was a $20 bill. And I don't know what the guys had in mind, whether they figured it covered I'm not sure exactly how much that would have covered, but that was the end of the gas theory, at least at our place. And it's a story that has gone around the world because one of my brothers is a conflict negotiator, has done contracts with the United Nations in different locations. And he has often told that story. And to me, it symbolizes how one act of goodness can inspire many, many people. So, is it dangerous to return good for evil? You could think of some reasons why maybe you shouldn't do that. Um, is it, could you be exposing yourself to some danger? Uh, might you be enabling bad behavior if you sort of inadvertently reinforce the bad behavior? Uh, if you do a lot of it, would it take an emotional toll on yourself? Would you start thinking of yourself as, you know, being hopeless or something? Could it somehow be a matter of overlooking justice where uh, sometimes um, letting a person be accountable for their own actions can be a good thing? Um, could it be misinterpreted? Might the evildoer interpret it as manipulation or something and lead to even further complications? Well, I think all of that is something that, a person has to think about. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you always step in immediately. But my sense from how Jesus behaved is that he was more focused on taking risks, returning good for evil, and those concerns were not necessarily foremost in his mind. I'm going to summarize six reasons why returning good for evil comes down to being it's divine genius. First of all, it confounds the enemy. It's not what people are expecting. They're expecting retaliation. So it really changes the dynamics. The second, I think, is just as important. It's really, really easy when you're the subject of evil to start thinking of yourself as a victim. And that becomes really unhealthy over time. Returning good for evil suddenly makes you the agent and really shifts the balance of power, so to speak. You become an activist, an agent of change. It disarms hostility and aggression, often causes the enemy to rethink their evil intentions. It breaks the cycle of retaliation. So it really does have the potential of totally reversing the dynamics. It inspires others, just like my story of the gas thieves and how that story has traveled around the world. It builds social cohesion. When people choose to respond to evil with goodness, it tends to strengthen the fabric of society by promoting unity and solidarity, acts of kindness create a sense of trust and interconnectedness among individuals and communities. And so today, just like Elisha in the conflict with the Arameans, and like Jesus in his dealings with those who would do him harm, we are called to return good for evil. And may we all have the courage to do that when the opportunity arises. Thank you.